Oh, I'm a nonfiction writer, best known for my immersion writing, where I spend a long time with somebody so that I can have a story to tell about their lives and I can get to know them more deeply than just an interview. Yes, I was interested in journalism before I took this journey, but encountering anthropology helped me see that I could take my journalism further, that it could be deeper than what I knew, and that it suggested ways to spend time with other people, how to do that, how to think about yourself, how to make them your teacher, blend in so that you have a minimal effect on their world, but you're just hanging out. And, I mean, I didn't invent this. Other writers, Gay Talese, other people were starting to just hang out. Tom Wolfe, and I'm sure they influenced me. Though I was so young, I was not really paying attention to who my influences were. I just saw a good way to learn something interesting and have an adventure and see, yeah, if I could live this way, because I didn't know if I could. It's quicker than anthropology, and also you can tell the story like a story. The analysis is less important than introducing people and getting to know the people. Yeah. I'd say it is. It gave me the confidence in the method and in the possibility of publishing something which I hadn't grown up expecting to have. So yes, it really did set me on my path.
Yeah, and subjects in a way. Yeah,
it's true, it's true. At a certain point, I guess, you go meta, right? So yes, I'm writing about writing and how things that have worked for me and things that haven't worked, and all of the ethical issues you encounter and the practical challenges of being with people who are not like you, and yeah, so that's comes out in the United States later this year. The ones you just mentioned, but I would add Steinbeck because of his sympathies, who he cares about, and Orwell also, and stylistically the British writer Bruce Chatwin. I'm sure there are more. Those are the ones that come to mind immediately. If I think of more, I'm going to interrupt you and add them. Because when you write about other people and claim to know them by spending time with them, you have to be cautious in how much you can claim to know. So I had an aunt who told me when she heard I'd been riding the rails, "Oh, you became a hobo, and now you know you can always get by." And I thought, well, I think you might be right, I can always get by, but I didn't become a hobo because I could leave. I could go home. I could call my parents. They would send me money. So as long as you have that, you don't understand homelessness in the same way. And so I like to think, you know this phrase, participant observation? So any journalist or anybody can approach a topic. You start as an observer and you read about it, and then you meet those people, and then you spend a few days with them, and then maybe you take a trip with them, and you come very close to participant but then you go back and you write from a place around here where you have enough distance to have to be able to explain. And if you go all the way, I think you lose your ability to explain certain things to a general audience. And so I like to come very close, but then I do think it's important to step back. And with John Howard Griffin, obviously he crossed a very great distance in being seen as a black person and in spending time with them. But there is that scene in the book where he looks at himself in the mirror and says, "I had become a Negro." And clearly, today no one would make a claim like that. I don't fault him. It was early, and nobody. These things are kind of new, and I admire him in so many ways. But no, I do find it's insulting to groups of people if an outsider comes in and says, "I understand everything," right? It's insulting. So you have to be respectful and conservative in your claims. That's really a good observation, because it's true. I just rode the Paris metro this morning. Every day in New York I ride it, but I'm in a foreign place, and I was thinking how I was like that when I came to New York. I don't know where to turn, where to sit in the train, all of that. And yes, he reminded me of not knowing anything and having to figure it out. I think that's an important role for a journalist or a writer, is to be in solidarity with people who don't have a place at the table. It's also important that they speak for themselves. We're not so different, you know. We care about the same things. You deserve the same things that I have, and yeah. So that does underlie all of these projects. The idea that we can understand each other and we speak the same language. Sure, because that's my goal, is to understand what they know and also to feel what they feel. So I'm devoting all my energy to seeing the world through their eyes. That's empathy. The word "with" in English suggests some sympathy, like I feel sympathy with that homeless person. I'm going to give him some money. But if you are out of money and you're sitting on the street with that person, that's empathy, and that's where I try to get to write my book. But that's a very important concept for me. I try to quote them as much as I can. And another benefit from the one you mentioned is then it becomes more like reading a novel with characters who have their own opinions and can speak for themselves. So yeah, I try to quote as much as I can. There are so many.
Yeah.
The only one I don't like that is of those labels is creative nonfiction, because it suggests a larger role for the imagination than I'm comfortable with. I think of myself as a documentarian, but I'm proud to be a journalist, and I guess I would call it narrative journalism, or long-form nonfiction. One of those two. I hope it's literary, but that seems to be flattering myself. I want to write a journalism that conveys more than just the facts. I want the texture of life, and I want language that is as rich as what fiction writers use, because we, as journalists, we have so much to learn from good fiction writers. And they're the best storytellers, and the good ones pay close attention to language. And for too many journalists, there's simply a thought, you need to tell the facts. That's your job. But I think we can be better than that.
Maybe naive at the beginning.
Definitely.
That's what you write.
Oh, it's totally true. I read it today and I go, oh my God. It is. And it's also a memoir of an experience I invented. I made it happen. I went and had that experience. So it's not a passive experience, but it is very much, yes, you're right, like a Bildungsroman. Right, and even today, American booksellers aren't sure where to put these books, because sometimes they're in current affairs, sometimes they're in memoir or biography, sometimes they're like my book Coyotes sometimes it's in sociology. Occasionally a big bookstore has travel writing, and sometimes this book has been in travel writing, but the same with Coyotes. I guess it's travel writing, but not like you're not going to pay a lot of money to go travel this way. No, it's frightening, and it's illegal, and you are at risk from the train, the physical vehicle, and the police, and then other people you might meet. They're not all good people, and some of them like to fight, and some of them you need to be careful. So you can have a wonderful experience, but you have to keep your eyes open, and you have to be strategic. Sometimes you think, oh, it was nice to meet this person, but I think I'll keep going and meet somebody else. It's like if you have a bad place to ride on the train, you find a better one. And so it's not a good way to travel if you're a passive person. It rewards active decision making. No, that was a premature declaration that I would like to retract. So, recently I helped raise some money for a documentary film called Freeload, made by a very interesting man who traveled with his cameras and sound equipment on trains for 2 years, and got to know a number of today's hobos who are mostly punk anarchists. They're young people, you know, lots of tattoos, often tattoos visible on their face, their neck, their hands, where college students don't put their tattoos, and living a hobo life, but with a different ethic than the guys I met, who were still very much saying they were looking for work, you know, talking about a code of the road where people share and you have a partner, and those ideas, they live on, but they seem old-fashioned when you meet some of the current writers who are more upfront about not wanting to work, or they're truly disaffected. They don't want to be part of today's society. It's corrupt, it's hypocritical, they can't stand people, they want a life without pressure and without expectation, and they find it on the rails. So that's always been a strain of the hobo. So I think they're still the hobo. Well, thanks. I do think to understand a character, you try to find out as much as you can about their past, and they don't always tell you. They don't always tell you the truth, but usually if you tell them about yourself, they'll tell you something about them. And so I focused on that. I tried to find out about Lonnie and how he'd spent his life, and Pistol Pete and BB and Forrest and Bill, who was the Vietnam veteran. They all had such interesting lives. I think that's another good curiosity for a writer. If I want to learn about your life before Diacritik, right? You might want to talk about it, because people like to talk about themselves, and that's my research. So yeah, sometimes just listening is a good way to be with people, and they appreciate it. Exactly.
Yeah.
I still don't know. That guy, he said he was a paratrooper. I don't know. In a way, maybe it doesn't matter. It's the story he's telling. It's the story I pass along. Yeah. It sets it in a moment in time, right? It's funny. I was thinking about that yesterday in my book, New Jack. I'm talking to a prisoner about the morning Princess Diana was killed. And yes, so that's the historical context. But with John Lennon, it was particularly affecting to me, because he was, as you know, killed by a stranger. And when you're writing the rails, that's who you fear. It's a stranger who's sick. And so there's a real... that fear plays a role in hobo culture. Yeah.
Book in the French edition.
For the first time, it's never in no other edition has had pictures.
Oh.
It's the very first.
Yeah.
Of course, it's a way to remember your life and to honor an experience you had, and honor a culture you visited. So it's definitely true. Still, if I hadn't taken the photograph, we wouldn't have the picture of Sheba Sheila Shields or some of the other characters in the book. So I like that hobo's idea. You don't need a camera. You need to pay attention. That's true. But you can also have a camera and pay attention. That's right. No, it's unmediated. You're there, and you get cold when it's cold, and you get wet when it rains. And that's part of the experience. Sometimes it's a reason to wish you had a home, because sometimes it's nice to control your environment a little more. You're really at the mercy of the elements when you live that way. That's right. No, a town leaves an impression on all of us, right? And it depends on who we are there. Are we in a respected position? Are we in a bad position? And so they're just like anybody else. The hobos remember which towns they got arrested in, which towns they got good food in. But it is funny to hear Denver described as a good town for eating, by which they mean lots of free food. And I'd never thought of it like that. I think, oh, the Mexican food? What food are you talking about? And they're just talking about the free food.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, they kind of are. It's true. It's true. Yeah. And
Sally.
right.
Really,
it's a particular argot of that world that identifies people to each other. They speak the same language, and it also lets you talk very specifically about things. So might refer to a rescue mission, but if you were a hobo, you would say it's a Sally or a Salvation Army. So it's more specific, and so that's always been a characteristic of life on the road, is that a special language. In some of the great old hobo books from the Depression, it's full of slang that I don't understand. Like those words. So, there was a complete slang vocabulary that's been lost. And I wish I knew it. I wish we could bring back some of those words, because they're kind of great. Absolutely, yeah, because particular words like that help you understand the thinking of the person who uses them, right? There's so many words for police, or for the shelter, or for the parts of a train. Then you understand that's their world. They have to, they talk about those things all the time. So yes, that's a really important way to pay attention to other people. Yeah, well, and also speaking of rhythm, if you know American music, how important trains are, and the train beat, that rhythm of a train, you hear it in so many songs, but also even in songs that don't have that train rhythm, there's the imagery of this myth of this lonely train crossing the landscape and creating the country, and so the hobos were sort of the scouts on those trains, the ones out there encountering it first and most directly, where the people in the cities who financed the railroads and made it all happen understand it less well in a certain way.
Rage in this book.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's many of them are very racist, and racism is an anger and a rage against other people, and there's no question. As you may remember, they don't even consider Mexicans on the scale of hobos. There's the good hobos and the bad hobos, and then there's Mexicans. And it was so clear to me that the Mexicans were the good hobos. They were traveling to work, and so why aren't they recognized? And I guess you only have to go as far as Donald Trump to understand why they're not recognized. It's the same reaction to strangers and to otherness. Though often I think these feelings are strongest among poor ethnic groups, right? Like some of these hobos might have been in economic competition with some of the migrants. And it takes a larger view to accept that, well, we're all in this together. It's a different thing to be a politician manipulating those group feelings against each other. But wherever they are, it's an ugly thing to make those discriminations, and I'm afraid the hobos make them. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And throw them out when they can't do the work anymore. And so among the hobos are a lot of people who qualify for that definition. They've worked hard, but now they're older or they're weaker or they're not of such use to anybody. So there they are, out on the edge. That's right. No, it's a bad dream. Well, it's an eccentric bunch of writers.
Yeah.
Some you would expect from the new journalism: Gay Talese, Tom Wolfe. Some are writers I was assigned in school: John Steinbeck and George Orwell. Some are writers I encountered on my own after school, from Bruce Chatwin, the great British travel writer, to other novelists, Joan Didion, Ann Tyler. I mostly read novels for pleasure. I read nonfiction in connection with particular projects. Adrienne LeBlanc, Tracy Kidder are nonfiction writers I admire a lot. And back when I was in high school, I was very interested in beat poetry. Richard Brautigan wrote all this crazy poetry and fiction that I found fascinating. Just the idea that you could use that language and you could talk about anything in writing. I'm a younger generation than the hippies, but the hippies broke lots of molds, right? And made it clear that literature could be all kinds of things to all kinds of people. And I benefited from that as a reader, and then I think as a writer, it just made me think, oh, there's new stuff, there's important things that haven't been written about yet, and maybe you should do that. And I hope young writers still feel that way and find reasons to approach new subjects, because we have to invent literature every few years. It has to keep happening. So yeah, I'm always looking for interesting new things. Leaving nobody to take him home. Only a hobo